this Transitioning Humanitarians Live. And today we have an amazing special guest, Anika. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and greetings to everyone who are listening either in real life or afterwards.
Exactly. Greetings to all, and we apologize that Vicky couldn't make it, but she will join us next week. So today, I requested Anika to join our show to talk about a specific topic that I'm calling it normalizing transitioning, and how transitioning is happening in our daily lives, whether we are conscious about it or not, and looking at that from that perspective. And Anika, we always start with the obvious question of introducing yourself, telling a bit about you, where you are, what you're doing currently, and then we dive into the topic of transitioning.
Um, there's a bit of a glitch with my connection.
No problem.
So starting from who I am and where I am
Yeah.
currently in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso,
Mhm.
and that probably explains with the connectivity because we do have challenges. Uh, for those who do not know me, my name is Anika Kristic, and I am a Serbian working in the. I think I've been doing this since 1995. So it's been a long while. I've done it in the Balkans, I've done it in the Caucasus, I've worked in West Africa, in East Africa. And currently, I am a roving country director for Plan International here in West and Central Africa region, and currently on mission in Burkina Faso because we are facing a transition of
Mm.
leadership, and that comes in very nicely with the topic that we are having. So as you see, I've been
Yes.
a humanitarian for a while, and recently I also completed my coaching certification where you and I have connected well. So all of those things kind of make up bits and pieces of who I am and where I am. So this is it in brief, and then we
Yeah.
can just dive into our topic.
Exactly. And for those of you who may not know, Anika is also a co founder of the amazing platform that I think like thousands of women use, Humanitarian Women, and that's called Humanitarian Women Network. And yeah, I think I know Anika from that network, I think, but also I'm sure many women know Anika from that network. Just I wanted to highlight that amazing platform. So diving into the topic of transitioning, so Anika, you being in the leadership role, and I think for some time now, and also looking at the transitioning and being that in the role of the leader and transitioning to that role, what are your perspectives on how transitioning happening in our like daily lives, in our careers, how you approach it, how you look at it, and how you really, I don't know, deal with it, I guess is really the question, right?
Mm. True. I mean, not only in leadership positions, but very much in leadership positions. Transitioning is such a gigantic part of our lives that we sometimes don't really see it. So when all of a sudden we need to define a transition or make a bigger step to go somewhere else or to do something or shift our careers, then we kind of start to define it, and we don't always realize that we have been doing it and transitioning from,
Yeah.
when we were a toddler, and then we transitioned into school, and that was painful, and then we transitioned into something else, and that was also painful. But there was a lot of good things that came with transition. I mean, having worked in the humanitarian sector and also having traveled a lot as a young person, I think these transitions and these movements across geography, across different populations, different cultures, that also kind of helps normalize, if you wish, the fact that things will not be the same and we will not always be in a familiar situation or a familiar setting. So that's simply, how you deal with it. And for me, some of my strategies have been to always have my support network.
Mm.
Also to clarify with myself, um, how comfortable I am with insecurity, with uncertainty, in
Yeah.
saying, okay, I'm going to a place where I don't necessarily know people, but what are my ways to actually know them from before? And for just making physical transitions easier, I've been able for a long time now, to move from country to country with 3 suitcases. I do
Ah,
not have containers. I do not have anything. I mean, maybe my family situation is slightly lighter than somebody else's. But for me, when I move to a different space, I have a few of my little objects, a few paintings or a few little things that then I kind of put in that new space. And that somehow makes that space. I think physically surrounding yourselves, keeping those small familiar objects that are easily transportable, when you do have to do this larger transition, so it's moving to a new country, moving to a new flat, moving to a new area, that keeps a little bit of identity, and it helps that braid of your transition, because your transitions also make you who you are, and every transition gives you a new experience um, that can be beneficial for you, but that can also be beneficial for other people. Also mean working with
yeah.
different other cultures. So how do I then, make myself known who I am by also embracing other people's ways of dealing uh, with those issues. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges. That also depends on what type of transition. Is it a transition from one country to another? Is it a transition from one organization to another? And also with the organization, also it might be a new country, which then makes it, a double transition, which is also a challenge. You have to kind of, get into the ropes and try to understand how the new country works. I think the
Yeah.
spirit of adventure helps. Like,
Mm.
you kind of, there's a whole traveler's gene that helps make these things easier. You know it's going to be challenging, and you know you're not going to always do things right, and you know that you will make your mistakes. But as long as you are giving yourself permission to make those mistakes and you're being kind to yourself, that you know that you're going to experience uncertainty, then the transitions are kind of smoother, and they do not present such a huge shift or a huge challenge. I mean, a lot of people in the world now have to make transitions that they have not chosen.
Yeah.
What if, somebody is
Exactly.
leaving your country? You have to run, you have to transition. You just have to be there because it's not even your choice. So I think it's a blessing for us, when we have transitions that are chosen and planned and reflected on for a long time, be it a career transition or an organizational shift, or something else. So that is, things become more or less scary when you're there. Things that you are looking at them from afar, they can be daunting.
Yeah.
But you are kind of in the mix of it, then there's little things that start to be opening up, and that really makes it easier to adapt. So
Yeah.
that's maybe transitioning has a very strong link with how resilient we are.
Exactly. Amazing that you're saying all of these things of like looking at how we're already dealing with those topics like uncertainty, going to different places, new places, getting to know environments that we have never known before, or maybe not as close as before, right? So that's why I love that how we could already looking at our lives currently and seeing where we're doing all of these shifts, all of this transitioning, and then how we can already also use those skills that we're using now to be doing somewhere else if we're wanting to leave the organization, or if we're wanting to change the organization or the environment, whatever the transition we're wanting. Because I think oftentimes when people come to me and say that, oh, transitioning to like back home or to something totally outside of what I'm used to, like, because many of the humanitarians that I work with have worked for 10, 20, 30 years in the setting, right? And then changing to something else may sound very scary or very like life changing. But then I think realizing that how humanitarians actually are so adept to be changing, and we are, I think, the only constant thing, like humanitarians say, the only constant thing is a change. We don't really have anything else constant in those settings because we never know what can happen tomorrow. We always work in very also dangerous environments, risky environments. So that's why I love, Anika, how you are saying that all of the things that we are maybe fearful, we might be already going through them. It's just that we're not often aware of it, or we don't really take time maybe to think about, these are the things that I'm already doing, and now I can also do something else. And how you're saying that once we are in the place, once we're in that setting, then it becomes less scary because we're already in it. And then we are like, what was I really fearing about, right? What was I really thinking would go wrong? um, because once we're there, then we start to learning, we start embodying the person that we want to be. So let's maybe, Anika, speak to some of the challenges, especially I think that humanitarians talk about when, like, we have many different passions, when we want to do different things, we want to advance our careers, we want to have certain stability, we also want to pursue other passions that we have encountered along the way as we were working. So how one does all of those things and still feel like we're succeeding in all of those things, because you seem to be the person who has like different passions beside the work that you do. So, how one does all of those things, what would you say to that?
I would say, yeah, one day at a time. But what you said just before moving on to that, something that you
Yeah.
said kind of triggered me. I think, especially for the humanitarians, um, probably the most difficult one is not having this life anymore, because we become so accustomed to this. And I've heard many times my colleagues say, and I've experienced it myself, you're coming from, you're coming to your so-called home country, wherever that may be for you, and you're now in the everybody else is normal. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's very difficult to find the right balance and the right fit. I remember there was one time where, everybody was, oh yeah, you're so interesting, and like, tell us more about this. And then you say one starts talking about their kid climbing the roof, and you're no longer interesting. And it becomes all about other people's realities, and
Yeah.
not yours. So this drive that we really need to move, and that we love this life and we want to continue doing, probably the hardest transition is kind of coming back wherever the home is. So that is
Yeah.
one element. Dealing with other people's fears, it's also, and especially for women, sometimes it can be a little more challenging, and especially with women who either have families or uh, are planning to have one. I remember when I first said, okay, I'm going and I'm taking a job in Liberia, West Africa. I mean, that was my first ever mission abroad. When was it? 2008, a while back.
Yeah.
And I had, half of my family was like, no, do you know, like this and that, and all of the prejudices that people have because they don't know or they
Yeah.
have read something somewhere, it all kind of comes down on you as a ton of bricks. And you start to question yourself, like, what am I doing here? But
Yeah.
if you persevere, like you trust yourself, it's really one day at a time. Trust yourself, you got this. You just go there. And when I got there, I even had the fortune or misfortune to break my leg physically, to slip and break my leg on the third day of the mission at the workshop. And it was like, oh, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do with this woman? But I mean, I totally transitioned into the thing. Yeah, I have a broken leg, but that does not mean that I cannot do my job. So got my crutches, got on the plane, went into the Liberian interior in Saniquili, Nimba County, hopped on crutches for 3 months. And that made me a new person. That made me a different person. That gave me a lot of respect and confidence and trust from the people that I was working with. So it's like these are some of the things. Just don't use the fear as your friend. Don't let fear intimidate you. Fear is your friend. It tells you like, okay, we need to maybe reconsider certain things, but you find other ways. For me, also pursuing different passions. I started my life as a translator in a working in a publishing company. So nothing to do with humanitarian before the war happened in my country, which is former Yugoslavia. But when I started going into the different deployments, I was working in Guinea during the Ebola response, where the Humanitarian Women's Network was actually founded in 2015. Um, I was still taking an odd translation of the books that interested me. I have friends who work in publishing, and they would say, "Hey, like, what about you doing this thing?" And I would be so tempted, and most of the times I would say yes, and I would make time between the busy humanitarian schedule and these moments where you are at home to continue doing this work, because it's important for me. It makes, you know brings me certain satisfaction, but also leaves me on the shelves as a translator of something that people are going to read and appreciate, and be better for it. Then also, um, pursuing my passions while I was working full time, I also said, well, you need to get a little bit more educated, girl. And I took my MBA online.
Oh wow,
With
that's
the
that I
University
didn't
of
expect.
that was tough. Oh my goodness, it wasn't tough. So it took me a little bit of time, but it really connected well with what I was working on, because it was all about like leadership and sustainability and looking at the MBA from the humanitarian perspective and so on. So yeah, I mean, it was something that invested a lot of time in, but it still uh, gave me meaning, and was able to do that. And in the meantime, seeing how coaching helped me in a couple of really very, very difficult situations, toxic environment at workplace, where I really needed that space that could not be shared with anyone else. I decided to, hone in my own coaching skills and my own drive to actually listen to people and be there for others to explore their own personalities and desires and careers and shine. So I completed my certification with the International Coaching Institute in Geneva. So now I'm a certified master coach and happy to join the family of coaches that are working with people. I think for me, today's these coming years.
Hello. Sorry for the technical issues. It seems like the internet,
Am
Anika's
I
internet
back?
is not well. Ah, yes, now you are. I can hear you anyway. Oh no. Okay, hold on.
Okay,
Okay.
suspense.
Yes,
We're
exactly.
back.
Suspense, we're back.
Well, I was saying this latest transition because I'm at the time of life where, you know People want to send you into retirement, but you don't want to go.
Yeah.
To prepare my to prepare my next phase and actually launch my own sort of coaching and moving away from fixed term
Mhm.
employment and so on. This is not for the next maybe 5 years yet, but it's time to start doing it. So the way that I'm already working with my colleague, taking a little bit of time to, you know, to practice my skills and do it. So you don't have to do I mean, it's not a black and not an either or. So either I do this or I do this, but it's more of a kind of a yes and situation where you
Yeah.
say, okay, but there's other things that I would like to explore. So you start doing some of those elements, and then you find other like-minded people. One important thing to
Yeah.
face difficulties, and difficulties will abound in all different transitions, and you might get hit from directions that you don't really expect. You think you're doing everything right, then all of a sudden somebody has an issue with you. So it's also something you need to be ready for. It is very important to surround yourself with your support network. And ever since the foundation of the Humanitarian Women's Network, this has been my support network, especially our group of co-founders uh, who were constantly like online and we're supporting one another. And if there's any challenges, we kind of just fly by. And you have people to talk to that understand you. It can be a very small circle. I think the Humanitarian Women's Network has also brought something interesting because it is a huge community. We're not 12,000 plus women, but it's also, in a way, a safe space where lots of, there's so much benevolence, there's lots of um, empathy going around. And it's like, there's so many people who have that experience that just throw in suggestions and words of support, and that makes a big difference. And that also feels very very encouraging to know that you're not alone in certain situations.
Yeah.
I mean, transition has a different flavor for everyone, and all transitions are not created equal. But I think what really is important is to listen to yourself and to be kind to yourself. To avoid, when you visualize, don't visualize how you're going to fail. Visualize how you're going to be awesome and succeed in whatever you're doing, because you're already awesome. You're here. You're alive. You're clever. You're there. Somebody, you're making a difference already. So that is also very important, because I know that our brains are wired for negativity. And
Yeah.
many times when you go through this like risk assessment or whatever, there's a bunch of catastrophic things that are happening and we're so overwhelmed. But having our own strategies for this, for me, some of the techniques that I've learned through coaching and the practice that I'm doing now with this methodology that is, liberation of negative emotions, that I can practice on myself and on others. It's really powerful. It's our little tools. You have your little toolbox, and then you just, when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel that things are completely so at that point, you can just, take a step back. If you have a coach, that I think is always a good thing in transition. I mean, of course, we're taught professions, and but I think this is a very very useful thing. It saved my life. I mean, it saved my sanity. And one of the situations where workplace and people.
Uh-oh. Okay, hold on. We will get her back. Apologies again for the internet. I fear we can't do much about that, but I'm sure she will be back. Okay. Once Anika is back, I just wanted to summarize some of the takeaways that I have taken from this conversation. Ah, she's back. I will tell you in a minute. Okay, Anika, you're back.
I'm telling you, this is thankfully the system is telling me that there's something. So when I see this orange thingy flashing, I know that I'm
Ah,
gonna
okay.
disappear. So as I was saying, coach sanity in that situation, and I was very grateful that the that I had that outlet, because then I could stage and I could plan and I could really reflect on what is going on in my interpretation. And the coach was very welcoming. So everything that I said would happen actually happened. But that I was able to discuss it with someone who's completely dispassionate, that allowed me to handle that transition much more easily. And then I ended up working in the
Yeah.
Caucasus with with a bunch of absolutely wonderful people, and that propelled me to different heights. So you never know where you might land, but it's very important to have that little toolbox. What works for you?
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So, the takeaways that I have from this conversation, Anika, is that we are already experiencing the challenges and also dealing with them, and we just may get more conscious as to how we're doing it, how we're dealing with fears, how we're dealing with uncertainty, and how we can use the same skill set to somewhere else if we're wanting to move on, right? And the other thing is also about the pursuing different passions is always possible, no matter whether we are changing anything now or not. So, in other words, don't limit yourself thinking that you can only do one thing at a time or one passion at a time. You can do many different ways if, as long as there is like the willingness to do that, the desire to do that, and also you can always find to do that as well. What I loved also what you said about, you looking at different ways of your transitioning and also getting ready for it well in advance. I mean, 5 years for me is like, my God, you know how to plan, because my like the longest I plan is probably 2 years. Then even then I feel so proud doing it, but amazing how you see this for yourself and how you see different avenues that you want to keep exploring, right outside of this career that you're going to be. So that's why I love also for any humanitarian thinking about transitioning and thinking of it as like something big or something overwhelming, something fearful. Consider that it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way, and you can always take things slowly and at your own pace of, like Anika was saying, what works for you, right? What works for you will be very unique, and your way, you just need to find that uniqueness and then see, okay, this is how I'm going to do. You can always get help if you want to. You can also do it on your own. And what I always want to advocate is that, we always have the chance to live our fulfilling life wherever we are. So it doesn't need to depend on the country, it doesn't need to depend on the job, it doesn't need to depend on any other circumstances. We can always decide how we want to structure that life, how we want to live that life, so that we don't need to like postpone it, I guess, is really the advocacy that I want to make. Okay, saying all of this, any last points, Anika, that you want to mention before we close?
Just to summarize, just be sure that you're kind to yourself and that you're taking your own time and exploring what works for you. Um, and just trust yourself and make sure that you have one or two trusted people to work with, or who can be your sounding board. And whatever happens is not it's not the end of the world. I mean, the transitions are difficult. It's probably the most painful and terrible when you lose someone, when things are so that everything blows up around you. But if this is a chosen transition, that you're transitioning in your career, that you're transitioning into a different country or a different position, a different organization, anticipate, visualize positive things, um, use your sounding board, and enjoy small pleasures of life that allow you to distress and your next step with more serenity.
Yeah, amazing. And the other thing that I just want to highlight what Anika said about is that either way, whichever the way you transition, think of it that you will be the person who can handle the challenges and who can go to that and make it successful, right? Even though our brains are so used to looking at things negatively of how things could go wrong, and it's important that we look at that as well, but most importantly, whenever we trust, we always have this sense of no matter what happens, I will know what to do, or I will figure out what to do. And that's, I think, is always a nice way to look at it, is like looking at it from, if we really trust ourselves and knowing that we can handle it, then nothing really becomes scary, right? It all becomes like doable in the end of the day. So that's what I loved about what you were saying, Anika. So thank you so much for all this amazingness that you shared with us. And I've seen some of the people messaging me that they're watching. So thank you for all watching live as well. We can see that Anika is famous in the humanitarian world. So, and Anika, thank you so much for being also very like honest and sharing how your journey is, how you are planning, or right, how you are thinking of your transitioning as well. And of course, we wish you amazing continuation of this journey. And yeah, and if anyone wants to ask questions, Anika, I'm assuming you are open to that. So we will tag Anika's details, and then you can reach out to her if you want to explore more. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all. See you next Thursday.
Thank you, Asel. Bye, everyone. Thank
You
you.
too.
Keep transitioning.
Yes.